how do you deal with a fast changing world, fast changing, um, unpredictable world that when everything is, and we've faced this during COVID, but if you want a epitome of this is a battle in the middle of a battle. And, we fought the Vietnam War and it was not very good. We didn't do too well. We did very poorly. And many deep thinkers in the field of military science started thinking about what went wrong and how do we need to handle this. And there are two giants, maybe there are more. I'm not an expert on military, but I know two thinkers who really changed the way in which the military fights. And it is all about dealing with uncertainty. It is all about dealing with fast change. And that is something that is a human problem. That is a problem that each of us faces. If you look at the world, if you step back and look at the world is becoming faster and faster. It's not only speeding up, it's also accelerating. It's not only accelerating, there is a rate of change of acceleration. It's called a jerk, where it suddenly starts moving. That's what is happening to the world, okay? And that is just real. And military is a very interesting field because, firstly, for two reasons. First, that the stakes are very high. It is life and death, and it is preserving your freedoms. So stakes couldn't be higher. That's one thing. Second thing, it is a large organized effort. So whatever needs to work has to be made explicit and communicated to everybody, not just communicated, but built into your way of thinking for it to be effective. So that is what we're going to be talking about. Now, the reason I'm doing this meetup, I've never done this before, is to actually prepare for meetups that are going to happen next week, okay? Because we are going to get these two incredible people to actually talk to us, okay? The first, so let me tell you about the two thinkers. The first thinker is John Boyd, okay? And the second thinker is Dan Bolger, okay? So let me see how to proceed. So let me talk about John Boyd. I prepared some slides. So let me go ahead and start the slides here. Okay, so the topic is military ideas applied to life, okay? And we're going to be talking about two ideas. The first one is John Boyd's idea of OODA loop. And the second one is Dan Bolger's idea. I'm calling it Earth Pigs. That is the name that he used to summarize the idea. Okay, let me go ahead. This is in preparation for these two presentations taking place next week. The first one is going to be with Chet Richards. Now, Chet Richards was a close associate of John Boyd. He was there when John Boyd developed the idea of OODA loop. The idea of OODA loop was fiercely opposed by the entire hierarchy of Pentagon, okay? It's a very large hierarchy, very powerful hierarchy. And John Boyd, and with like a handful of people like Chet Richards, were trying to change it. And they managed to use this idea of OODA loop to change the Pentagon so that the entire Pentagon accepted this idea. So that is one of the biggest applications of this idea. So it's not just about war. It is about effecting change effectively, okay? And Chet Richards, he's worked with John Boyd. He was responsible for selling the idea to Pentagon when the first Gulf War started, General Schwarzkopf invited, insisted that John Boyd be called in. He was the one who came up with the strategy. The general strategy is called the left hook, of going through the desert to cut the Iraqi troops off from Baghdad. Um, so that was his idea. So it has had tremendous impact on the military. The Marines adopted the idea very quickly. So, and Chet Richards has been in the middle of all of this. So I'll be talking to him about this idea, and we'll be talking about life of John Boyd. We'll be talking about the OODA loop, and two different applications of it. We'll also be talking about how do you apply it to business, to personal life. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, now, unfortunately, because John Boyd is no more, we couldn't get John Boyd. But in the second one, it's Dan Bolger who actually came up with the idea that has transformed the way in which US military fights. And he's written this in a book called Battle for Hunger Hill. It describes it. And he himself is going to be here. And we are going to go through and learn about that. Now, why is it that I'm doing these meetups about the meetups coming up? Because these ideas are very deep. These are very deep ideas. I have known them. I've been trying to use them for the past 10 years. But every time I come back to them, I find that I have not gotten them enough. Okay. I want to first, this is part of my preparation for these interviews, firstly. Secondly, I want you to be familiar with them so you can get the most out of this really rare opportunity of hearing and interacting with these two remarkable people. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this. So let me jump in now. First, let's define the problem. So I'm going to go on two tracks. One, the military problem that these two gentlemen were facing. And second, your life. How does it apply to your life? So let's look at the first problem. It's the problem of the failure of Vietnam War, the failure of American forces. It was horrendous. The casualties were horrendous. They were not effective in achieving their goals. And many, many, many military thinkers immediately started thinking about what went wrong and what needs to be done. Okay, so this is the military problem. The equivalent problem in your life is that there are always things that can change radically, unpredictably. COVID was a perfect example of that. The question is, how do you operate in such a situation? How do you carry on when things change fast? Okay. Now, the reason this is, again, let me repeat, the reason why this problem, military problem, is a perfect problem as an analogy for fast changing life, because is number one, war by its nature is extremely fast changing situation. You are up against an enemy. You don't know where the enemy is. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know how well you're going to succeed. You can have all the plans and they all can be upended in a minute. That is just the lay of the land in a war. Secondly, it is a joint effort. It is a effort of a large organization. So whatever strategies, whatever methods you're going to use, it's not enough to just have it here. You have to explicate it. You have to communicate it. You have to actually train people so that they it becomes part of their natural operation. That is how they react. That is what you have to achieve. So, and you can see the effect of it in life or death. You know, how well did you do? There is a tremendous feedback loop. For all these reasons, so military provides a very rich source of ideas. Now, it is very difficult to actually take an idea from one field and effectively apply it to everything else. Not just pretend to, but actually do it, okay? And what I have found personally is that though I get tremendous value from applying these ideas, every time I go back to the idea or listen to somebody else apply the idea, I can say, oh, I can do much better than that, that I have gotten only a small percentage of what this idea captures. Okay, so that is just how how it is. Let me just make sure here that this is working well. Give me just a second. Just want to make sure the views are correct. Okay, it's all good. Let me go ahead, share. Okay, are you seeing? Just a second here. Give me a second. I think it's the wrong screen. Give me a second. Sorry about that. Let me go back to share screen. Okay, there it is. All right. So that's why this is a great way of applying ideas. And I found it very hard. What I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to recap my understanding of it. I'm rereading the books I've read in order to prepare for these interviews. And I want you to be, the more familiar you are with these ideas, the more you're going to be able to get from the meetups with these great folks talking about it. So let me start with John Boyd. Okay, John Boyd is one of my favorite heroes here. He had 3 careers. His first career was a fighter pilot. He was a fighter pilot. And there he was known as 40-second, like 40 seconds Boyd. And the reason for that was that he had a running challenge to anybody, any other fighter pilot. He would say, choose any position, any speeds of the 2 aircrafts. In 40 seconds, I'll be behind you, shooting you down. And he was able to do that like 95, 98% of times, okay? So that was his career. That's how he started. His second career was that of an airplane designer. Before his time, the way in which airplanes were designed were focused on power, of being able to carry more ammunition, being able to go more distances, to have just sheer raw power. And he said, no, that's not the right way of doing that. Let me go back one slide here to make points about the Vietnam War in terms of what the problem was. Before Vietnam War, there was the idea of attrition warfare. The basic idea was the way you fought wars, the way you won wars, is to become as strong as possible, have maximum ammunition, maximum resources, and you just throw them at the enemy and you just destroy them. So it was focused on material. It was focused on having much more fighting power than that of the enemy, than just throwing the entire power at the enemy and defeating them. In the process, there would be horrible casualties, both of the enemy and your side. But because you had more stuff and more people, you would win. Also, the nature of the enemy, the way in which we fought was based on a nature of enemy, which was an old enemy, where the other party was also a conventional army that would do the same thing, try to do the same thing, mass up all their people and, and supplies and throw it at us, and then whoever wins, wins. In Vietnam, we faced an enemy which was dramatically different. It was insurgents, people who would mix with civilians, people who would operate in very small groups, people who did not have a large signature to attack. You wouldn't even know where they were. They were all distributed in jungles, and they would come together, attack, and vanish. Far more unpredictable, far more distributed nature of enemy. Okay, so that is what we are trying to deal with. So again, coming back to the airplane design, the airplanes were designed for pure power. John Boyd said, no, what fighter planes should focus on is maneuverability. It is the ability to change directions, the acceleration, being able to change direction, speed at a rapid rate is what a fighter plane should focus on. And he completely redesigned, I think it was the F-16 that got, or F-15 that was the first one that he designed. So he's the father of that new breed of aircrafts, which were smaller, but more maneuverable. And his third career was that of a military strategist. And that's where his idea of OODA loop comes in. And that is, one of the biggest ideas that I have found. It is definitely when I was writing my book of 52 living ideas, this is definitely one of the 52 ideas. So let me talk about that. So the problem of life is this, that you're living in a world which keeps changing all the time. And you are trying to adjust to that changing world. So you're trying to operate in that changing world. That's what you're trying to do. How do you do that? Now, most people have fixed ideas in their head, a fixed worldview, fixed goals that they're trying to pursue. And the way they think is based on a fairly static world, fairly predictable world. That is not the case in battle. And it's actually not the case in real life too. This OODA loop is designed to deal with fast changing world. So what is OODA? It is observe, orient, decide, and act. So first you observe, you take in the situation. What is going on? Okay. Then you orient. What does orient mean? Orient means to conceptualize what is going on. You use all your ideas, all the, as he puts, all the cultural traditions, all the previous experience you have, all the analysis, synthesis you can put together with, connect it to all the new information that you've gotten, and to orient of saying, this is what I think is going on. Then you decide what you need to do. Plan out your action. This is what I'm going to do. So that's the step of decide. And then you act. The action changes things. You observe again and do this loop again. Now, the core idea here of John Boyd is to operate within the Oda cycle of the enemy. Okay, so that means that if you can do this much faster than the enemy is lost. Let's understand why. If let's say something has happened and you and the enemy are observing that for the first time. If you observe it, orient, decide, and act fast enough before your enemy can even orient, then you have just rechanged their entire landscape through your action. So they are stuck to going back to observing again, and they get stuck at this orient, observe, and try to orient stage. So they are paralyzed in action. So if you can move faster, through this loop, then you can win against an enemy. Now, there are contexts where the interaction is not adversarial. But even in that, being able to take in what is going on and orient quickly, decide what you need to do and act gives you a tremendous advantage. You are far more adaptable. It is all about being adaptable. So that's what this OODA loop is about, okay? Now, I'm just giving a quick overview of these ideas at this stage. And I'm going to, I'll take questions after this. So, so this is the basic idea of the OODA loop. You can notice that there are all these feed forwards and feedback. So this is all about feedback. You know, you're relentlessly running this loop. It's a very deep idea. We are just, and if you look at the whole thing, the crux of it is orientation. It's like being able to orient. Observe is relatively simple action. Action is just dependent on your decision. The decision is guided by orientation. It is the orientation and reorientation. It is all about changing your views. It is similar to Bayesian thinking in mathematics, where you started out with some idea, you're taking in feedback and updating what is called your priors, updating your previous ideas of the world. So it is to hold your worldview as a variable and changing it in response to observations. The other part of it is that the action component. This is not a purely intellectual discipline. We are living beings. We live, we act. It is the action that gives you the feedback. So the purpose of orienting is to act. And you're taking the feedback and reorienting to make the action more effective. So there is an action feedback that is going on here. So this is my quick overview of the OODA loop. Let me go to Dan Bolger. So what we're going to do, coming back to the OODA loop, what we're going to do is that I'm going to have Chet Richards, who has written and lectured extensively on the OODA loop and all kinds of applications of it. I'm going to interview him. I'm going to interview him very systematically. I'm going to first talk about John Boyd, what he learned from him. I'm going to talk about the OODA loop. I'm going to talk about what does it mean to operate inside OODA loop of somebody else. So we'll go through this. There are multiple sources that are there online. You can just search for OODA loops and try to read up what you can, including some presentations by Chet Richards on this. So I would encourage you to do that, because the more familiar you are, I'm telling you, like, I'll just tell you that, like, a friend of mine, there are two friends of mine who actually understand this, whom I told this idea to, who understand this idea much better than I do, okay? The first friend, I met him about a year ago. He was visiting New York, and I talked to him about it, and I realized, wait a minute, I don't understand this at all, or not at all, but his understanding of it is so deep, and he's able to apply it so much better. Another friend of mine actually started a company using this idea, and he has like 100+ people working for him. And this is the idea, is the core of the business itself. He's come up with a way of doing something, applying this idea. So there are people, you know, any good idea, what matters is not just kind of understanding what it is saying. It is being able to do that in any situation is what you are aiming at. And so That's why I'm giving you this in advance so you can prepare. You have 1 week until Chet shows up next Saturday. All right, the next idea, which is also very similar, but it has a different take on it. So this is the story of Dan Bolger, okay? So as I was saying, the entire military establishment was shaken up by the failures in Vietnam. And everybody was trying to come up with how do you fight insurgents? So one thing that they did, the US Army did, this was, I don't know whether it was a joint command. So not just Army, but this is like 101 Airborne would do this as well. So they prepared a simulation camp. Okay. Now, unfortunately, though I have found Dan Bolger's idea is very useful, extremely useful, I don't think I understand them as well as I understand OODA loop. So I'm trying to work hard. I mean, to give you just a teaser, one of the reasons my meetups are different than anybody else's is because I have those 4 rules, and I have had them for 5 years. I started them with my very first meetup I did. And those 4 rules, the idea of the 4 rules and what they should be, is based on Dan Bolger's this idea that he has of earth pigs. Okay, there's a component that he has 10 commandments. So my rules of meetup, which are very different from his 10 commandments, but they are based on that. They are patterned on that. So it has had profound impact on my life. But at the same time, I think this is so deep that I am struggling. I'm rereading the book right now. So I'm going to describe the situation to you to give you some flavor of what this idea is, and we will go from there. All right. So again, coming back to Vietnam, the enemy was Viet Cong. Okay. So what military decided to do is to actually create this camp where they simulated Viet Cong. So US Army folks simulated, and acted like the Viet Cong. Okay. And they would send in different battalions in and see how they performed against Viet Cong. Okay. So this is all simulation. And the people who are the residents of this camp, who were acting exactly like Viet Cong, were very, very good at doing what Viet Cong did. Okay, so they would be all strewn throughout this forest. It was a giant area with forested area, a large area on the scale of this is like a full-fledged simulation, real simulation, except there was no live fire. That's the only difference. And all these battalions would show up and they would fight for several days against the Viet Cong in simulation and see how they did. And invariably, all the battalions were getting slaughtered. Okay, slaughtered. I mean, this is very disturbing. Like, you have recreated the situation where you failed, and you are sending in all these battalions and they're just getting slaughtered. Okay. Now, of course, the good thing about simulation, and I recommend simulations very highly, because you don't actually die in simulations. In some ways, ideas are like simulations, and you have to regard it as such. They are your maps, and you have to let your ideas die instead of going and dying yourself, or wasting your life, wasting your time on that. So the idea of simulation itself is a crucial part. But that's not Dan Bolger's. This is, military said, okay, we have to do a simulation and we have to learn how to defeat. So they would keep going there it was called the Hunger Hill. And this is what would happen. Let me go back here. Okay, so they would not know how to deal with Viet Cong. So what Dan Bolger did, that when his battalion failed too. The difference was that when after the failure, he decided to figure out what went wrong and what could he do to win against such an enemy. Okay, and that is what this book, it's called Battle for Hunger Hill. That is what this book is about. It describes this entire problem, what happened the first time, how they thought about the solution, and how they came up with the solution. So they came back and regrouped and tried to figure out what went wrong. Okay, and they ended up capturing what they needed to do in these 10 commandments. Okay, I'll bring up the commandments, but first point of it is that it shows firstly the power of principles. You need to boil down what you need to do in crisp, clear terms. So he had these 10 commandments, which he developed over a long period of time, a lot of thinking, a lot of trying out. And those 10 commandments were not optional. Okay, these were printed, these were, they had like pocket copies of it. Everybody in the battalion had them. They were drilled on them. They practiced together, and they made it an integral part of who they were. Let me bring up the 10 commandments. So to give you a flavor of it, we will go through this, with Dan Bolger himself, because he will be able to explain this. Give me just a second here. Sorry about that. 229. All right. So now this may seem like, so these are the 10 commandments. So I'm just going to read them out. I don't expect you to get too much from it, but just see the pattern, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to apply this to our lives. Okay. So first principle is to have 10 commandments. So let me give it as an example. So for example, I have the 4 rules. Okay. The situation, of course, in the meetup is completely different, but still it's a very fluid situation. There are complete unknown, complete strangers coming together, some people who know each other, and human beings can do a whole bunch of things. How do you make sure that a great meetup is produced every time? Okay. So the rules that we have are each of them is designed for various purposes. So I'm going to first talk about the 10 commandments, and then I'm going to talk about my 4 rules. Okay. Now, my example is a very tiny example. This meetup is very small as compared to, US military itself and how it has transformed, how the impact of it's changing the way it operates. So the first commandment is kill the enemy. Okay. Now, this may seem very odd. So why do I need to say that? But unless you clearly know the purpose, you're not going to be able to actually do it. This is the first thing. So no matter what else, that's what you're trying to do. Now, the other important thing is that in military, there are 2 possible objectives. One is killing the enemy, and second is holding ground. Okay. So this gives a clear priority. When you are operating in an unknown space, you're trying to get rid of the negative. You're trying to get rid of the negative. Occupying space is not valuable in the middle of a forest as much as kill the enemy. So it's carefully designed for that. The second one, which is very interesting, is win over the civilians. There is actually an equivalent of that in Boyd, of that in order to win, it is not enough to destroy the enemy. You really, only the people who appeal to the non-combatants win over the long range. You want cooperation of people who are undecided. You want cooperation of people who are outside of the conflict. So thinking of them, thinking of civilians and making sure. So that's why, so these 10 commandments actually cover a very large set of issues that you have to keep in mind. The next one is act on contact. There are all kinds of detailed descriptions of all of this. Act on contact is very important. It's like, you cannot wait. You have to react quickly to things. And then he has certain formations in which he does that. Next one is, if you fight somewhere, don't stop there, move out. So the idea of saying that you don't present a fixed target to the enemy, you keep moving. Next one is never lose contact with our dead and wounded. That's again a very core principle of the way in which America operates, that you don't leave behind your dead and wounded. That is a core to kind of establishing the morale of people. Security is a must, moving or sitting, front, flank, and rear. I'm just going to rattle through the rest of them, and we're going to go through each of them and why each of them are important next week. So the next one is major roads are off limit. Make combat trails to where mines are not. This is, most people operate on kind of standard paths. This is the power of taking unusual paths, side roads, trails to get where you're going, because there are all kinds of issues of traveling on well-worn paths, not just in war. Next up is night vision goggles are to be worn in head or helmet. These night vision goggles were very clunky and they were very uncomfortable to wear, so most people would not wear it. As a result of that, they would get killed, because this night vision goggles gave you a significant advantage over the enemy, but you couldn't use it unless you wouldn't be able to use it unless you have them on already all the time. Then the next one is about daily duties. What do you need to do every day in order to be prepared? So it's an idea of preparedness. And the final thing was their motto: live and fight light, earth pigs. So earth pigs was their way of characterizing themselves. It was saying that you remain close to the earth, remain light, and don't be dependent on this massive supply system to keep you going. If you can break that up, if you can learn to do with less, your ability to fight goes up. You're not weighed down by enormous. So they systematically tried to cut down the number of pounds that each person had to carry. So they made it a lot more easier for them to move and to fight. So it's all about maneuverability. And all of this. So the interesting thing is that this is trying to achieve a faster OODA loop than the enemy. And this is the steps in which he does it. So it points to several things, use of principles, trying to capture, trying to make sure that all your principles cover everything that you need to cover. Then you train with those principles so that they become a natural part of you. So you and the people that you're working with all are using the same principle, and you're able to operate that. Next up is, I want to make one more point, which is a core point of his, and that is he had this idea of red team and blue team. So he actually had two headquarters of his battalion. One headquarter would be directing the operations that day, and the second headquarter, which was identical to that but separate, would be planning what is to be done next day. And the next day, the command would shift to the headquarters that was doing planning today, and the other headquarter, which was actually executing today, tomorrow they would be doing planning. So this is the idea of separation of planning and execution, which is a fundamental idea. Uh, Once you have a plan, you have to go and execute it. At the same time, you want the ability to change that. And this is a way he managed to achieve that. And of course, with all of this, he actually managed to go in and succeed tremendously in the fights. So this is a very quick overview of both these ideas. So now what I want to do is that I want to open up and let folks ask questions. There are a whole bunch of people who have asked questions, have been ignoring the chat so far. So let me go ahead and take the questions. If you have questions, go ahead and type !! in Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom. Okay, so we'll start with Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe.
Yeah, the one part that it's a fantastic presentation and explanation, by the way. So thank you for doing this. I thought about this in terms of how this could be used in cybersecurity, and that was just one particular area, but that a really important part of that is getting inside your opponent's OODA loop. And I really don't understand that aspect of it yet. That's the part I'm kind of struggling with. And I was wondering if you could maybe, if you, or I know that somebody said in the chat has mentioned that they've used it, could maybe expand on that. Because sure. I've really, that's the part that I need some filling in on.
Sure. So let me go ahead. Could you type the name of the person who said they have used it, and then we'll come back to them later.
I believe it was Aaron, maybe.
Aaron, okay. So let me describe it to you as best as I can, and then I'll hand it to Aaron to do this. Again, what I want to say is I want to establish the context here that I do not have any military experience, and my ability to understand these things are limited. To the extent to which I have used it, I found it extremely useful. Every time I use it, it produces good results for me. And every time I come back to it, I say, oh, wait a minute, I can do this more with it. So the idea of operating inside the OODA loop of somebody is that before they can orient themselves and figure out what is going on, and to kind of say which way is up, you have already not only oriented yourself, but decided what you need to do and acted so that their entire context has changed. So they have to go back to looking at reality and saying what is going on. So it's a relentless way of acting fast so that the other, your opponent cannot really orient themselves, cannot really figure out what is going on. So the best example would be something like, in the Gulf War, because the communication is completely cut off with the headquarters, and you're being pounded so much, your entire kind of supplies are gone. It's another way of thinking about it is that you're actually acting on the mind of your enemy, not on their physical thing. You're basically making sure that they are confused, that they are disoriented, and they are demotivated because they have not written. But let me have Aaron respond to that. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, I think one of the things that's important, especially because most people, 99% of people never been in the military and won't be. So you can almost get rid of a lot of the nomenclature and sort of, let's call it the specialization around the military language, and just treat it just sort of as a decision system. And I think the easiest one to view it as, that most people will have a sense of, is if you were a fighter pilot playing a video game. You know, and whether any of you've ever played that type of video game, I mean, I don't mean some cool advanced one today that kids play, but I mean like the ones maybe we would have played 20 or 30 years ago. You know, you're sort of in a closed system. You're sort of, you know, you don't have great visibility, and really what you see is in front of you. And if you sort of embrace that as the starting point, every decision you make is driven by one thing: time, and the ability to compress time. So it's like starting from time as the one sort of component that you're trying to actually defeat. You're actually not trying to beat your competition. You're trying to beat the time that your competition makes decisions in, whatever that competition is. And then all you're doing is going through this observe and orientation process and creating velocity in a feedback loop, if that makes any sense. And so now your question earlier was, okay, how do I construct something to do that? That's where the red and blue teams sort of come in, sort of fundamentally, and then the constant cycling and improvement of those red and blue teams. And so I know in the cyber community or the cyber security community, you know, there's always been this sort of context of the different types of hackers, bounties, sort of, I would say, to be blunt, sort of half-baked red teams, but they're rarely empowered because people, you know, because at the politics level in companies, people don't really like a lot of the answers they come up with. So the fact, I mean, I'm just being blunt, right? I mean, having done corporate IT, but once I got out of the military, that's what I've been doing for 25 years now, is that the more you can create that type of cycle within that cybersecurity team you're in, that you can create velocity in that decision, and, you know, obviously have enough political support to do that. So if it's creating, you know, bounties, if it's creating sort of hackathons, like real as you can get, you know, to really come after yourself, whatever your business that you're, you know, sort of protecting, you know, et cetera, then you're going to be creating a simulation that's probably about as close without hiring third parties. Maybe you do that too, and learn from them and cycle it back through, right? I mean, it's just it's like it doesn't stop. It's like every time you think you got it, pretend you're in a new generation fighter plane, right? And that's what everyone has to realize. The reason this Boyd stuff took off, well, let's put it this way, the reason it took off in the Air Force is that the Air Force was trying to figure out in generational fighters, as they were kind of procuring them, you know, what would be the most effective fighter that would work. And they had all these sort of plans, right? Like very physics driven plans. And what he was able to do is sort of prove that there was think of it this way, there was like a blended mix of different features. Think of it as software features of a fighter, that if a pilot could sort of, you know, optimize those, they can always get into that winning position, right? They can always get, you know, and that's why it was called 40-second Boyd, because in 40 seconds, I think it was something on the order of, you know, 900 or 1,000 of these attempts, and within 40 seconds, he was in the winning position in over, like, you know, 980 of them. I mean, even the 20 that he wasn't, he got into winning position, and most of those just took longer than 40 seconds. So obviously the guy wasn't some, you know, Leonardo da Vinci of pilot, as a fighter pilot. I mean, he sort of was pretty great, but it was that he understood the sort of optimal relationship of all those physics to get into that winning position. And he got rid of any biases that he had to figure that out. And so the more you can get your people to sort of get rid of their biases, right? So if they look at it and say, oh, well, I only like using this tool for security scanning because it's my favorite, right? Well, that's a big bias, right? Like, look at, like, what does the enemy use, right? What's their toolbox, you know, and then have your people maximize their toolbox, even if it's like you don't like their toolbox, because that's their, you know, but because who cares? No offense, what you like, you know, what counts is what, you know, the enemy has, right? Does that make any sense? I mean, hopefully I'm making some sense.
Absolutely does.
Okay.
I mean, you know, especially, and there's a psychological, that explains the psychological component, that he studied a lot of psychology in order to create this loop. So it wasn't
That's
high level math that would fit into the decision hypothesis. But again, yeah, the
absolutely.
cultural.
I mean, people forget this guy got both masters. Well, I'm trying to get it right, but maybe it was masters in physics, applied physics, but also in engineering, right? So I mean, it's kind of a wild card that way. I mean, most people, space program pilots, whatever, they kind of take a track, right? They're kind of like the nerd R&D track, or they take the applied track for obvious reasons. He sort of said, well, I don't care what I want as my track. I want to see all the tracks and then sort of figure out all the right things to leverage within the tracks, right? And so that's this constant cycle. And it takes to be blunt, your number one challenge, because I've used these in business on and off for years, it's finding people who are comfortable being this uncomfortable for a long period of time, right? Like kind of forever. And most people just don't want to be that uncomfortable, right? They want to get a management job after 5 years, checkbox, good team. I did my hard work, but now let me do PowerPoints, right? And so and budgets and spreadsheets, whatever. And that's like the hard part, is finding people who are like, are you ready to go? And what I found, and this is the last thing, sorry, I'm taking too much time here, but is that you're not going to find the perfect people. Find people who are willing to cycle in and out of this. That's the best thing I found, is like you kind of create a red, a blue, and a green team. Green team is sort of like R&D team. You get to sort of play a little more, go to conferences, like kind of take a break. And then the blue team is sort of the production team, and then the red team are the devils, right? And then just have people who are comfortable cycling in and out. And you'll find that I would say most people, 3 out of 4, are sort of comfortable with that configuration, because it gives them a chance to go to their kids' games, they take a summer break, whatever, right? They can be normal. Because when you're in red team mode, you got to have people who are like the people trying to hack your business or whatever it is you're defending, right? They got to they're not going to be like, well, I'm done at 6, I ran the script, I'm good, and then leave.
Thank you, Aaron. That was just great. Thank you.
Okay. Really sorry for talking too long.
No problem. I thought it was excellent. I thought what you said was excellent. I think that's very good. So folks, what I strongly recommend, John Boyd himself did not write much. The medium that he chose, which is also very interesting, he communicated to people through presentations. And he has these presentations, and like people would ask him, like, okay, like for example, when he was trying to talk to people about what's wrong with the aircraft design, they said, okay, give me a written report. He said, no, I will give you an oral report, not a written report. Okay, and so he's very good at saying, how do I actually get through to something? And he chose this medium of presentations. And the great thing is that all his key presentations are available online. So I would recommend going through, Joe, especially to you, going through those presentations. Those are just amazing. I did meetups on each of those presentations a few years ago here. So they're incredible. So I would recommend going through, and that's a great, it will take some time, and those are fairly short. Those are fairly powerful. There's a very powerful way of actually communicating. That's the tool that he actually used to change the Pentagon. That's what it is. So I would recommend them very highly. Okay, folks, thanks for being patient. Next up is going to be Kevin, Mike, and Martin. Kevin.
Thank you, Aaron. Actually, John here, he asked me some of question. One suggestion, I would say maybe one topic, maybe we can form a red team or blue team. They try do the idea challenge. My question about is, OODA diagram, the central one piece is Orient. They got 5 small circles inside, interact each other. Actually, Aaron, as you point some of them, culture perspective, then, if you can elaborate more, would be great.
Kevin, what I recommend is that this is deliberately an introduction. Okay, we're going to do this next Saturday with Chet. Okay, Chet is going to go through this whole thing. Let me see if I can spend a minute, maybe. I don't know. This is Okay, let me show you what kind of things are here. So first point I want to make is that orientation is the heart of the whole thing. Okay, that's the hardest part. And that's the part which is very difficult for us human beings, okay? Because all of us want certainty. All of us want to hold on to whatever ideas that we have. As Aaron rightly put it, you have to be comfortable in being uncomfortable in order to use it. It's all about saying, this is what my orientation was. Let me decide and act based on that. Now I'm observing what is going on. How do I need to reorient? And the point here is that orientation means simply to bring to bear everything that you know on to the new observations and try to form a new integration, a new picture of what you think is going on. So it includes all of your thinking. So that's really the heart of this entire thing. So think of it as reorientation. You know, it's about your commitment to reorientation. And it talks about the different parts of it is basically your body, your physical context, your cultural traditions, your process of analysis and synthesis, being able to kind of tease parts together, put them together, taking in the new information, use your previous experience. If you look at, if you want to summarize all of it, it's everything basically. Put together everything afresh is what this is telling you. And so that's a quick answer. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead. I'll give you 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, thank you. The wars used to be fought by doctrine. If there was civil war, which was the bloody percentage-wise than anything we've ever had, there's an organization called TRADOC, Training and Doctrine, where they read books and marched and did doctrine. And the leaders of the Civil War both went to West Point on both sides, and they knew exactly what they were thinking. Now, Kahneman worked for his first job before he became rich and famous was working for the Israeli army. And he did some of the same stuff. Now the reaction was of changing the way wars are fought was the German Blitzkrieg, and they had their own OODA loop with 5 steps. And the first step was called Einheit, which was build a team where everybody knew what everybody else thought, what everybody else on the team thought. So it wasn't just one plane, it was a bunch of planes that Boyd worked with, and as a flight leader. So he made that work, and the F-14 was not as good as the MiG, but he knew the vulnerability by having a bunch of mosquitoes. They can take out MiGs one at a time. Now, the other one that we've covered is Russell Akov and the systems theory. And Russell Akov and Robert Good and Mackall and George Danzig during World War II essentially reacted to that Blitzkrieg. And we basically won that war by attrition. Now, I think, and I don't know if Boyd and Boyd isn't going to be there, but one of the other guys who you've talked about ended up his career as a 3-star general. I don't think you would get them to admit that we lost the Vietnam War. We didn't lose any battles in the Vietnam War. Now we lost it in Congress. So that's another issue. But OODA is essentially the systems theory that we talk. Now, why does it work? If you do it the way we normally do it, you get analysis paralysis, the way we learned it in the statistics and operations research books. What Boyd brought in is he realized that all decisions are piecewise linear. So build a little, test it, build a little, test it. And not just the particular engagement with a particular aircraft, everything he ever did in his career was part of that database, and he imparted it to his team. And it was quite a design goal to say that piecewise linearity makes it work, because then you could ignore because multidimensionality and all the nonlinears. And it wasn't steady state, it was the change of steady state, partial differential equations that he solved implicitly. And I'll yield the balance of my time, although I can say a lot more about Kahneman and Robert McNamara well, one more time. There's an organization called the Office of Technical Evaluation and agency is the last word. And they were responsible for deciding whether to build, what to build. And Eglin Air Force Base, where Boyd was one for part of his career before he, on one of his tours, was the test facility where that occurred. So I yield the balance of my time once again.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate that. Tom, I wanted to ask you about the relationship between the OODA loop and the agile process.
Okay. It's the agile process has one loop, and OODA has two loops. So OODA's a little bit more intelligent and a little bit more encompassing, and probably that's why it, in fact, was more successful in more complex situations.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Next question is, or comment is from Martin. Martin, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Well, I was studying a few years ago strategic perspective that the military is used to use in France at the beginning. And it's very interesting if everybody are familiar with that, or I'm sorry, not, should investigate a little bit more, because, for example, I participate in the G20 when I was in Argentina, in the V20 that they make a presentation about visioning the future. It's like you can see different scenarios in the future and how you can strategically modify them to get what you want. And otherwise, I was thinking I remember one time that I tried to find a very good price or discount with a flight, and I choose a lot of different locations to make a mess with the system, and then brings me the low-cost solution of the flight. Because if you choose randomly different places to travel in that moment, the machine couldn't understand where you go and then give you the best answer or the low-cost answer. And another thing that I remember, it's in psychology, when you have two different decisions that you give to someone and are from the same level, people they choose do both. For example, if you say to someone, sit in the car and put your seatbelt, that are similar, and you're not saying like sit in a car and kill someone, you put like the same level. That is very interesting what happened to people.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. So folks, if you have any more questions or comments, let me know. Again, I'm telling you that this is a really rare opportunity to be talking to people of this caliber. I'm delighted. I have a whole bunch of authors coming in today. We had Michael Strong, who was just incredible. I'll be putting up the video soon, so if you missed that one, it was about education. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to have Marcel Kaustin, who is the founder of the Julian Jaynes Society. Julian Jaynes has been a big influence on me in understanding what writing and what writing does for us, and how the older mind was different from the newer mind, how it's going to be about origins of consciousness. And then, Saturday and Sunday, we're going to have these two gentlemen come in. Next question or comment is from David. David, go ahead.
Hi, Shrikant. Yes, and just very briefly, well, first again, thanks very much for this great introduction, and of course, being able to invite these incredible people to speak. Just one way maybe to give people another way to think about the OODA loop and how to think about it. Again, I'm not a military person, but I think about it in the film The Hunt for Red October, if people have seen that a long time ago, and the very early scenes with in the sub, the Russian sub, and the commander there, played by Sean Connery, training the various people on the sub in the command bridge, going through some trench or something, and they have calculated out where they need to make this turn for this blind, and he tells them, okay, change this to, speed up to this, recalculate, do this, recalculate. And he just keeps telling them recalculate, and makes just changes, recalculate. And that's sort of maybe a way to visualize or think about what, an example of an OODA loop that he was sort of trying to impose upon them. I'm changing the conditions for you. You need to prepare for this in real battle, in real life. Change speed to this, recalculate when we need to make the turn, recalculate.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. So, all right, let me do one thing. I'm going to put a link to Boyd's presentations. And anybody who thinks there is something to this idea, I recommend looking at it yourself, reading these things yourself, because there is no substitute for it. It's a very deep idea, and the hardest part is actually to make it part of you. Kind of again talking about it in terms of Daniel Kahneman. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. This is, again, we have a tendency of going with our system one, our reactive system, and you have a illusion of certainty with that. This is all about getting your system two operational as well, in order to kind of reorient. That's where, the system two really, comes into play. So it's a very deep idea. All right, folks, so this has been amazing. And I look forward to seeing you next Saturday at 12 p.m. for the presentation on John Boyd. It's going to be an interview. If you have any questions you would like to ask, you can go ahead and send me in advance. My email address is 52livingideas@gmail.com. I'm happy to take questions, think about them, send them to these folks in advance. So if you want, the whole purpose of doing this presentation 1 week ahead is to give you the heads up, point out that this is something which is very deep and very powerful, potentially life transforming, allow you to kind of prepare for it. If you have any comments, you can go ahead and keep sending it to me by email. And I look forward to seeing you next week.